Watching Your World, and what a fitting way to begin a show where we take a look at a lot of the drama back and forth and put in perspective, beginning first and foremost with some big news out of the U.S. Supreme Court, essentially saying that the president's travel ban was, as implemented, okay, that it didn't violate the Constitution, but it was within the narrowest of votes, a 5-4 vote. Shannon Bream at the Supreme Court on all of this. Hey, Shannon.
Hi, Neil. Well, the president is celebrating today after months of legal wrangling, losses in the lower courts, and now 3 versions of this executive travel ban. They call it the proclamation, the White House does. The president saying today he feels vindicated after all of these fights, after months of what he calls hysterical commentary from both the media and Democrats, who he says are unwilling to do what it takes, he believes, to secure the border. Writing for the majority, the Chief Justice backed him up in today's 5-4 decision, quote, "The proclamation is expressly premised on legitimate purposes, preventing entry of nationals who cannot be adequately vetted and inducing other nations to improve their practices." And while the conservatives found the president was lawfully within his executive powers based on both the text of federal immigration law and the text itself of this travel ban, there were 2 separate, strong dissents, including one by Justice Sotomayor, who said the majority was wrong to ignore the statements that President Trump had made on the campaign trail and when he was a candidate and also after being sworn in. She said this, quote, "The president's statements, which the majority utterly fails to address in its legal analysis, strongly support the conclusion that the proclamation was issued to express hostility toward Muslims and exclude them from the country." A lot of demonstrators here today at the court, and critics are speaking out.
Today's Supreme Court's decision is extremely disappointing. Disappointing to Muslims and to all Americans, all people who believe in equal protection and equality.
Okay, so this case actually is not over because what the court was ruling on was this idea of an injunction to stop the travel ban. So now that they've outlined the contours of their reasoning, they're sending it back to the lower court. So it will actually now be heard and decided on the merits. And Neil, I won't be surprised if it ends up back here at the Supreme Court once that's done.
Wow, that's incredible. Shannon, thank you very much. See you tonight. In the meantime, we got Fox News Chief Judicial Analyst, Judge Napolitano. You know, Judge, by a 5-4 vote, as Shannon pointed out, the court apparently rejected this argument that this represented an unconstitutional religious discrimination. What did they mean by that?
They meant that they would not take into account what candidate Donald Trump said he would do when he was running for president. And the dissent said you cannot fail to take that into account because that's what his motivation is. So if his motivation is to keep people out because they are Muslim, that changes the court's analysis, and it requires the government to jump through a much higher bar in order to pass constitutional muster. But if the purpose of the proclamation is to, as the Chief Justice said, secure the nation's borders, further the president's ability to use congressional tools to keep people out, to force the countries from which they came to engage in better vetting for people leaving there, all of which are legitimate government roles, then the government's bar is a much lower bar. The dissenters said, wait a minute, he is so much a part of what he says, how can you overlook it? The majority says, if we keep looking at everything politicians say before they get into office in order to address the constitutionality of what they do when they're in office, there will be no end to our research into their words. So that's the divide that was confronted in this case today. As Shannon reported, it was decided by just 1 vote.
Yeah, Justice Sotomayor was among those saying this reminds us of a decision we might regret, as you refer to the Japanese internment decision back in 1944, I believe.
Yes,
this was similar to that.
This was a the only way I can describe her dissent was, and I know her well, was a fierce dissent. She's passionate about these issues, and she's predicting that this opinion.
She's saying this was a bigoted decision.
Yes, she's saying it was a bigoted decision because this will rank with Korematsu, which is really one of what we call the dirty dozen, one of the 12 worst opinions in the history of the country, where the Supreme Court upheld the right of President Roosevelt to detain Japanese Americans without proving fault, just on the basis of their ancestry. The Chief Justice, this rarely happens, for the majority to address the dissent. The Chief Justice says, look, you used nice ruffles and flourishes. We all know how horrible the Korematsu decision was, but this case has nothing to do with Korematsu. This is not locking people up. This is just saying, go home until your country vets you better.
Did people buy that distinction? I know on the left, people are going to have one view. On the right, they're going to have another view. But
I don't think this case is a unified.
The fact that he went out of his way to say that in response to Sotomayor's argument, what did you make of that?
I think he was aware. The Chief Justice is very concerned about legacy and image. How will this opinion be viewed after he's no longer Chief Justice? I don't know if Justice Sotomayor his prediction will come to pass, but the Chief Justice was obviously concerned enough about it that he chose to address it in the majority opinion. It's a relatively narrow opinion, and as Shannon pointed out, this is an opinion on a preliminary injunction, meaning tell us what the law is while we try the case. So now it goes back to the trial court for people to say, okay, it's constitutional. Here's why it doesn't apply to me. So whoever wants to come in the country from into the U.S. or one of these countries, whether they enter here in Brooklyn or whether they enter in Honolulu, gets a chance to get a trial now. They can't challenge its constitutionality, but they have an opportunity to demonstrate to a trial court judge, a federal district court judge, why this ban doesn't apply to them. And as Shannon predicted, this is going to go on and on and on, and eventually we'll come back to the Supreme Court. But the president's executive order remains in play and is fully enforceable during the pendency of these trials.
Amazing. I actually kind of understand it. With the emphasis on kind of.
You are smarter than you give yourself credit for. I don't think Gasparino believes that.
No, he doesn't.
I know it to be so.
He's just jealous.
He's in Italy watching us now, and it's 10 o'clock.
He's at the Venetian Hotel. Who's he kidding? Judge, thank you very much. The judge has been like on every single show. I think he was, you name it, he's on it, explaining it to all of us. Let's get to read on a list and a follow-up from conservative commentator Jenna Ellis, the Wall Street Journal's Shelby Holliday, Democratic strategist Michael Starr Hopkins. Michael, I'll begin with you because you have the view that this is one of those few decisions the Supreme Court, makes that it will regret, that it will have to come back and address, right?
I do. I think this is going to end up going down in the realm of the Dred Scott decision, like the judge said, in the realm of Korematsu. I think the court here failed to look at intent. I think now in this third iteration of the executive order, I think there are some legitimate arguments about the constitutionality of it. But I think here the court failed to look at what was the intent of the Trump administration. And when you look at the cake baker's case, there they did look at intent.
All right, that might be the case here, but they obviously separated candidate Trump from President Trump. Jenna, what do you make of that?
They did.
They did, and unlike what Michael says, intent here doesn't matter. It matters what the rule of law says you can and can't do. If we're playing a chess game here, it doesn't matter what your intent is. It matters can you move the knight to a specific position or not according to the rules. So the political fallout here is going to be a free fall up for the Trump administration because this was a win for the rule of law, for the Constitution, and for every American family. And because it was such a narrow vote, 5-4, and both in the travel ban decision and in the NIFLA case today, this is telling every American family who voted for President Trump that they made the right decision because Justice Gorsuch is now on the bench. And at the James Dobson Family Institute, we hear from millions of families daily from our constituency and our network that talk about why families are important, why the rule of law is important, why their vote matters. And the Supreme Court today played by the rule of law, not by the politics.
All right, Shelby, looking at this, and we have this great immigration debate and back and forth on the controversy over the separation of these kids from their parents at the border and then reuniting them. Does this move the needle there?
Well, I think politically this is an extremely important decision. Basically, for what you mentioned, yes, this is a huge win in the president's sails. He sees this as a huge victory for the White House. It certainly reaffirms the president's power when it comes to issues of national security and immigration. It also just underscores the importance of elections. Elections have consequences. And this was an extremely close decision that was decided by a justice that the president himself picked. So it's likely to rile up the president's base. We also have 7 states going to the polls today in primaries. So it's unclear how it'll play out on the ground and how it could play out in midterms, but it's certainly seen as a victory, and the president can turn around, and he's already turning around and saying, hey, look, Democrats, I do have this power. I do have the authority to implement
the rule of law and to crack down on illegal immigrants, to secure our borders. And he sees this as related to his policy on the southern border. So politically, yes, it will have consequences, and it is important for the president.
Michael, you see it just the opposite, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is, and I think Shelby's correct that the president believes that this is going to help him, but I think this is also going to get Democrats out to the polls in 2018 for the congressional elections, because now we're already hearing about Democratic groups coming together for protests over the weekend, not just now regarding immigration, but also regarding this Muslim ban. And so I think what we're going to see is Trump's going to feed his base, but this is going to be used by Democrats to also excite
I don't know about that.
base.
I can't see a decision big, and momentous as this is, moving the political needle one way or the other, but what do you think?
I think it's going to move the political needle in terms of all of the people who voted for Trump in 2016 as kind of the lesser of two evils. This is going to reinforce that that was the right vote, and they're going to be actively supporting him. And even though Democrats, I mean, the only thing they can complain about is that the politics actually don't matter to the Supreme Court. And so if we're looking at the people who do care, this is going to help President Trump.
All right, guys, I want to thank you. I apologize for the abbreviated, all the breaking news stuff as well. Good takes on all of this. Also, Harley Davidson, you remember the company that came to the White House just a couple of weeks after the president was inaugurated? Everyone was getting along fine just then. Now Harley Davidson in the middle of all this says, we're leaving, taking a lot of jobs with us overseas. We don't want to be slapped with these tariffs. The president says they're using that as an excuse.
Harley Davidson announced that it's moving a plant to Thailand. You've been very
Harley Davidson, John, was going to do that. They announced it earlier this year. So Harley Davidson is using that as an excuse. And I don't like that, because I've been very good to Harley Davidson, and they used it as an excuse. And I think the people that ride Harleys are not happy with Harley Davidson, and I wouldn't be either.
All right, be that as it may, Harley Davidson is taking a lot of jobs with that and taking overseas to buttress itself against European Union tariffs that are coming its way. A lot of people, and the president isn't alone among them, saying it's using that as an excuse for what had been a difficult period and difficult sales, and having nothing to do with the tariffs that haven't even taken effect yet. Illinois Republican Governor Bruce Rauner joins me right now. In his state, Caterpillar and Deere, two very big multinationals. Do you ever fear, Governor, that they're going to follow suit?
Well, Neil, great to be with you this afternoon. I am concerned about the tariff war. It has massive consequences for manufacturers in Illinois and across America. It has huge ramifications for farmers in Illinois and across America. I hear from my constituents every day about it. They're deeply concerned. Most of us, I certainly am one who supports trying to change the trade agreements that we've had in place. They've been unfair, particularly with China. We need to make trade more fair, but we've got to be careful. Everyone loses in a trade war and tariffs, and high tariffs could devastate the Illinois economy, and I'm very concerned about it.
So do you believe, Harley Davidson, that these approaching tariffs were what prompted this decision? The president seemed to argue, and others have said as well, sir, that this was kind of baked into the Leave in America cake already.
Well, I'll say I am a Harley rider. I'm a motorcycle advocate, have been since I was 14. And I'm troubled by the announcement. I don't know all the history of their decision. I can't really comment on that. I can say that I've heard from manufacturers in Illinois that they are hurt by the tariffs and the tariff discussions. Some of them are contemplating significant layoffs. Some of them are looking to move their production to other places. So I know it's having an impact.
So they have told you that, Governor, that if these were to go through, they would have to take some serious action?
Yes, I've heard from manufacturers specifically in Illinois who said they have to do layoffs and move production if some of these tariffs come about.
Do you agree with some of your Republican colleagues, at least in Washington, I'm talking about those and Republican senators, Governor, who say that this should be checked by Congress, that whatever action the president wants to take with regards to tariffs, it needs their okay?
Well, I'll say this. America has lost jobs and been economically harmed by unfair trade deals for decades. China, in particular, has taken advantage of our technology and our companies and played unfairly. Other countries have as well. So we need to try to change those. But we've got to find a way to do it that doesn't cause massive disruptions, huge trade war, massive tariff fights, because everyone loses when that happens. Hopefully we can find a middle ground.
You know, the president has argued, and, you know, given the markets, and they've been volatile of late, as you know, Governor, the markets seem to trust him, and that cooler heads will prevail, and that there is a method to his strategy of scaring the you-know-what out of folks and getting them to come to the table. What do you make of that?
Well, the president has his style of negotiating, and you know, it clearly has worked for him through his career. Other people have different styles. Certainly, you look at what the administration and Congress have done together to reform our tax code. It's helped the American economy boom, and it certainly helped Illinois. Look at what the administration and Congress have done to reduce regulatory burden on American businesses. The American economy is very strong, and Illinois is doing much better as a result. So, got to applaud that. And clearly, we've had unfair trade deals with many countries, and trying to change that's important, and we should support it. Hopefully, we can find a way that we don't get into a trade war. Tariffs are devastating and can hurt America, and we can lose American jobs. We've got to try to avoid that.
Governor, thank you for taking the time. We appreciate it.
It's good to be with you.
Governor Rauner of Illinois. In the meantime, Peter Strzok has already agreed to testify before the House Judiciary Committee tomorrow. Unfortunately, it's a closed-door session, so you'll never find out what's going on. The Republican Congressman, Matt Gaetz, who says the doors should be open for everybody. He's next. He's here. All right, we've got Florida Republican Congressman and House Judiciary Committee member Matt Gaetz. He was going to be at this very, very big hearing tomorrow featuring Mr. Strzok, and a lot of people are wondering why we can't all hear it, because he can. He's concerned as well. He thinks everybody should listen to what Mr. Strzok has to say, just for fresh air. Good to have you, Congressman.
Good to be on, Neil, and I absolutely agree. The lack of transparency has not served the country well in any of these matters. And so I think that when we've got the key people available to tell their story and respond to questions, that we ought to do that in the most open and transparent way possible. The president holds that view. I hold that view. But unfortunately, it's a minority view here in the Congress.
What happened, though? I'm told that there were those at the FBI, including the president FBI director, who was concerned about Mr. Strzok speaking this way or in an open forum, and that some secrets could be compromised. So whose idea was this?
I don't know. I do know that Mr. Strzok is scheduled to come back to the Judiciary Committee in July, so it'll be a pretty aggressive schedule with Comey and Lynch and Strzok as potential witnesses that we want to hear more about. Also, Lisa Page, right, who was Strzok's girlfriend at the FBI.
So she's saying that follow-up one, right?
Correct, and we hope to have Mr. Strzok at an open hearing as well. So I don't know whose idea this was. I think it's a bad idea. I think that Mr. Strzok will be asked initially about the August 8, 2016 text message where he said no, he won't, we'll stop him regarding the Trump presidency. You'll recall that it was just 9 days before that he opened up on Papadopoulos, and just 6 days after that statement that he said there was an insurance policy against the Trump presidency. One thing that we'd like to really get to the bottom of is whether or not July 31st was truly the moment when the Trump investigation with Russia began, or whether or not there was intelligence collected on the Trump campaign previously. Those are questions that Mr. Strzok is uniquely qualified to answer, and I hope we learn more tomorrow.
So, Congressman, just to be clear here, there was a threat of a subpoena for him to testify. He volunteered, he came. So someone, you don't know who, decided it would be best that this be a closed-door affair. But it's your hope, just to clarify here, that in the next appearance, it's not that, right?
I hope all appearances are in the open. I opposed the Andrew McCabe deposition behind closed doors as well. I just don't think that doing things behind closed doors has served the country well. This is something Americans are focused on. They're smart. They know the facts. And we ought to ask the questions in front of the cameras.
One of the questions a lot of folks want to get clear from Mr. Strzok is what he knew and when he knew it. For example, in the context of his very disparaging remarks about then candidate Trump, was Lisa Page privy to any information beyond their whatever personal contempt for then presidential candidate Trump was? That were they saying what they were saying in the context of some Russian rumors or collusions that would, prompt this type of comment? What do you think?
Well, you're right. The question goes beyond just personal bias. The question is whether or not the bias of Peter Strzok manifested itself in the form of investigative decisions. Remember, Strzok was the lead investigator on the Hillary Clinton email investigation. He was on the FBI's investigation into President Trump and Russia, and then he was drafted onto the Mueller probe. So that's going 3 for 3. And we ought to know whether or not there was bias in terms of the prioritization of the Trump-Russia investigation over the Hillary Clinton email investigation. You'll recall that the Inspector General said that he was not sure that it wasn't bias that resulted in a tamping down of the investigation of Hillary Clinton and acceleration of the Trump investigation. That would be very improper, and only questioning will fully illuminate that fact pattern.
Congressman, I know you have a tight schedule, but I'm curious. I know a lot of comments and texts and individuals, obviously from Strzok to Lisa Page. Now we know about Andy McCabe and all, did not think very much of Donald Trump and all these other unidentified agents who similarly did not think much of Donald Trump. So I had a clear bias against the guy. I have as yet to run into, in all the study, I haven't read nearly the volumes on this as you have, but in anything that I've read, not one agent that seemed to have a bias toward Donald Trump, liked Donald Trump.
I have not seen that either, and it's not just the agents, Neil, it's also the attorneys. You'll recall one attorney who also was on all three investigations was saying "Viva la resistance," literally associating himself with the resistance movement to the Trump presidency while he was serving at the Department of Justice and at the FBI, I should say. And so I think that we need to expose who these people are. We need to find out what evidence they handled, developed, what interviews they conducted, because you may see a lot of the evidence regarding the president as the fruit of the poisonous tree if it was collected improperly or in the absence of compliance with the law.
Congressman, thank you. Very good seeing you again.
Thank you, Neil.
All right, you heard a little while ago from the Republican governor of Illinois. He was very concerned about the president's ongoing tariff tension with a number of countries, including our friends and our enemies. Meet Barack Obama's economic Svengali, who's just as concerned, maybe more concerned. Austin Goolsbee is next.
Other countries are negotiating. And without tariffs, you could never do that. And if they don't want to negotiate, then we'll do the tariffs. And just remember, we're the bank. We're the bank that everybody wants to steal from and plunder. And it can't be that way anymore.
All right. Well, if you're looking for someone leaning on this trade war stuff, it's not the President of the United States so far, indicating that the world needs us a lot more than we need them, particularly when it comes to China. So he's holding tight to his plan here to stick tariffs on any country that doesn't bend on this issue. Former chairman of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors, Austin Goolsbee, on that. Austin, always good to have you. He says this will all work out. Will we be better off for it? What do you think?
I hope he's right, but boy, it doesn't really seem like it. You know, nobody wins a trade war, and I perfectly understand he's not the first person to have an objection about the Chinese taking the intellectual property of American companies. President Obama, President Bush, President Clinton each tried different strategies to address that. I know that if you take all your allies and alienate them by threatening trade war against your allies, that doesn't help you negotiate with China to get them to do what you want on the China front. And it's actually more likely at this point that China is going to go to our own U.S. allies and get them to unite against us at the WTO than it is that we can get them to join our side. And I never thought I'd have to say that because it seems crazy, but I think there's a real danger that if we get into a hot trade war, that we're going to be talking about recession, not just in the United States, but for the whole globe.
Well, the argument has always been that the Chinese recognize all of the above you said. As for teaming up with some of our allies, that might be debatable, but they've seen their market tank. I think it's technically the Shanghai has moved into bear market territory. In other words, fallen more than 20% off its highs, multi-year lows. Their currency is getting smacked around. Now they're doing everything they can to stimulate an economy that's hiccuping. So they need us, to the point of the president, more than we need them. And they need to do a deal. They just don't want to lose their face here on this. What do you make of that?
Yeah, look, maybe, but you know, we need them too. That's how the trade works. It's definitely not a zero-sum situation.
Says not as much, Austin. What do you make of that?
But I think the president, Neil, as we've talked about before, clearly does not understand what a trade deficit is. This is not like a bank. He's saying the U.S. is a bank that they're robbing. That's not how trade works. And when you look at China, how does putting tariffs on Germany and Canada help us to negotiate with China. It's backward. It's
no, I know what you're saying,
confused.
but his argument has been that, you know, they gouge us too. They have special cushy deals as well, so much so that
no,
the German
I know that's
automakers,
his argument.
No, I know.
But there's no evidence of that.
No, I hear you. When you're fighting with the world, it can be a zero-sum game. But his argument has already prompted the German automakers to say, well, we'll drastically cut tariffs here. Hopefully the German government will approve it. The European Central Bank will go through with the European Union. But they want to avoid this. So where do you see this all going?
Well, right now, where I hope this goes is that the president, like with some of his other Twitter announcements, just kind of backs away from them and doesn't actually do them when he starts to see the impact, like this Harley-Davidson or a number of other manufacturing companies who say...
Do you believe, by the way, the Harley-Davidson thing, Austin, that was just a setup? It's blaming tariffs that haven't even happened yet to exit.
Yeah, look, I'm not sure, but let's say it was a setup. The president says it was an excuse. Then I guess my question is, why, when we passed the tax cut for corporations, did we include the provisions that are going to, depending what country Harley-Davidson decides to move these jobs to, the Trump tax bill is going to give them a tax cut for doing this. So what were they thinking when they designed those provisions when they passed the tax bill? So either way, it doesn't seem like it's good news.
All right, well, you could flip it around. I'm sure you've heard the administration flip it around to say whatever we lose on these Harley-Davidson jobs, if it's a few thousand, we've gained millions over the course of this 17, 18 months of the Trump administration that dwarfs whatever impact we're seeing here, you say?
Okay, now wait, hold on. There's two things. First, the tariffs destroy thousands more jobs than they save. There are way more steel users than there are steel producing jobs in the United States.
But it hasn't happened yet. Your fear is that it will.
Correct.
Right?
And let us hope it never happens. Let us hope it never happens. But if we get the 50, 100, or now the president's talking about $200 billion of tariffs on China, and China's saying they're going to embrace $200 billion of tariffs on the U.S., if we get that, hundreds of thousands of people are going to lose their jobs. So let's hope that doesn't happen. Now, it's true the economy's been going well. That's the irony of this. Donald Trump's strongest point is that the economy continues to recover.